You're listening to Blackpool Church Podcast. Join us for our Sunday gatherings to make friends, explore faith and encounter God. Visit our website, blackpool.church. This is the Talk Archive.
So much, Tom. Thanks, guys, for sharing your stories. Absolutely just incredible. So encouraging to hear what God's doing. Imagine you've got two neighbors, next door neighbors, one on either side. I don't know where you live. I don't know if you live in the middle of a street or not, but just imagine for a moment that you've got a neighbor on either side and you live your life happily and peacefully at number 3, whatever street it is. And the reason in general that you live such a happy and peaceful life is because of number 1. Oh, number 1. The guys at number 1 are just the best, you know? Jesus said you need to love your neighbor, and number 1 made that easy because they are just the most wonderful, generous people. When Christmas comes around, number 1, they're knocking on, they've got you a little something, and you're like, oh my goodness, I had no idea. How did you know that I would love something like this so much? That's so thoughtful. That's so kind. Sometimes you maybe forget to mow your lawn or whatever it is, cut the hedge or something, and you come home one day and you realize, oh my goodness, my lawn's been mowed, my hedge has been cut. You have a look at number 1, they've mowed the lawn. They've come and mowed my lawn. Wow, number 1, fantastic neighbors. But they need to be good. Because number 5 on the other side, not the ones, right? Does anybody here live at number 5, anything? No, right, good. It makes sense. Number 5, it's the complete opposite story. Christmas comes around, not even a card, not even a smile. In fact, you've got a sneaking suspicion that sometimes parcels are being delivered, but they're being collected by number 5, your parcels. They're being kept, wrapped, and sent to your worst enemies. That's your suspicion. When you do finally remember to mow your lawn or trim your hedge, you come back, you discover there's grass clippings all over my lawn. You look, number 5, they've dumped their grass clippings on my lawn. Sometimes they even dump it on number 1 and blame you. These guys are the worst, right? Number 5, they're not the neighbors you want. Okay, question then. Imagine this is your scenario. And I asked you, not who's the nicest neighbors, but who do you suspect are the happiest of your neighbors? Okay, I mean, who's living with the most joy in their life, would you suspect? Or if you were to think, I wonder who is most hopeful about their future of my 2 neighbors. You know, who's expecting good things from the future and who's free from fear about what might come? Or who's most content with what they have? Who's got a deepest sense of peace with the things that they already have? Right, the answer would be obvious, isn't it? It's number 1. No question. No question. You would assume that the neighbors living like that would be number 1. And of course, we're assuming that knowing nothing else about them. You know, we don't know whether they have a great job or a really great car or an amazing family or anything like that. We don't even know what the houses are like. You know, number 5 might be this huge 20-bedroom mansion. Number 1 might be a shed. And we're still confident that number 1, they're living in peace and contentment and joy compared to number 5. All we're thinking about is their generosity and recognizing that generosity goes hand in hand with joy. And so today, as we're wrapping up this mini-series that we've been thinking about called the Generosity Project, and I'm basically asking for money again, talking about giving money again, I wanted to do a little temperature check, basically. Are you feeling like number 5? You think, oh my goodness, not this guy again. You know, or are we number 1? We're up for it. Where are we at? Where are we up to? Yeah? Anyone for a week 4? No? Yeah, 1? Great. No, I didn't want a week 4 either. I want to encourage you to be up for it, to be up for thinking about generosity and giving again. Because in my experience, there is nothing you can do that will bring about as much joy as thinking about giving and being generous to other people. It is like a supercharged ingredient to your joy. So that if you think about the people that you know who are the most generous people, I guarantee you they will be the people living with the most joy. I've never found anything more fun than giving. Jesus said it's better to give than to receive. And the last time I thought about it, receiving was pretty good, right? It's good, receiving. But Jesus says, it's even better to give. And so today I want to tell you about some of the most generous people in the whole Bible. And as it happens, it's a church in the Bible that I think are some of the most generous people. And so the topic I want to speak on as we finish up is a generous church. A generous church. We've had a generous God, a generous life. I want to speak about a generous church. And this is from 2 Corinthians that I'm reading. We're in chapter 8, and I'm going to start at verse 1. So you can follow along in your Bible if you'd like to. 2 Corinthians 8. And now, brothers and sisters, we want you to know about the grace that God has given the Macedonian churches. In the midst of a very severe trial, their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. For I testify that they gave as much as they were able, and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service to the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. They gave themselves first of all to the Lord, and then by the will of God to also to us. So we urged Titus, just as he'd earlier made a beginning, to bring also to completion this act of grace on your part. But since you excel in everything, in faith and in speech, in knowledge, in complete earnestness, and in the love we've kindled in you, see that you also excel in this grace of giving. I don't know how familiar you are with that particular passage, but it's sort of not one that I certainly know off by heart or anything. It's not one I'm hugely familiar with. But I believe passionately that this is a passage which God wants to speak to us through. It has some kind of striking resemblances to our situation. And I just was so struck as I was reading it that this is something almost like a gift that God has given us to encourage us when we think about generosity. And it's all about these churches in Macedonia. So let me just unpack it for you for a moment. So St. Paul, is writing this bit of the Bible. And he's writing to a church in Corinth. That's kind of one part of the Middle East. And he's trying to encourage these guys in Corinth to continue giving. They've sort of started off, and they've made a really great start at being generous to other churches, but the job's not done yet. And there's some doubt as to whether they'll be able to continue giving. And so he writes to them to encourage them, like, you've started this amazing thing off. Let's finish the job. Continue giving in the way I've encouraged you. And to make that case, to encourage them, he decides to tell them about another church and some other churches in Macedonia. And as he does it, we learn a couple of things about them, and we sort of feel like we know where the story's going. So he starts off by saying, you know, if you guys are going to give, have a look at these guys in Macedonia. The thing you need to know is they're in the middle of a severe trial. A severe trial. And we don't know exactly what that equated to, but we can be pretty safe in assuming that it was persecution. That Christians in the churches in Macedonia were being attacked or hounded, tortured, maybe even murdered for their faith in Jesus because it was so widespread in that region. And he says, look at this church. They're in the midst of this horrendous trial. And then he goes on and he says, they're also living in extreme poverty. And extreme poverty we generally define as things like no access to clean drinking water, no access to suitable medical support, no shelter. You know, this is the kind of life that people were living in these churches in Macedonia. And so after hearing those two things, you think, right, well, we know where the kind of argument is going. It's like, you guys should be giving because, look, there are these guys over here who are struggling. And so we assume the argument is going to be, okay, so maybe you could give to them to support them. But no, something radically different happens. Suddenly he says, in the midst of a very severe trial, Their overflowing joy and their extreme poverty welled up in rich generosity. It's sort of like a bit of a double take moment. Because you think, hang on, no, I thought they were supposed to be the people who were being given to. They were supposed to be the people who were being supported. They're supposed to be the people having a tough time. How is joy bursting out in this church and welling up into generosity? And so actually, far from being the people we're telling you to give to, we're saying, look at how they gave. Maybe you could live kind of like them. What on earth is going on? He goes on, for I testify that they gave as much as they were able and even beyond their ability. Entirely on their own, they urgently pleaded with us for the privilege of sharing in this service of the Lord's people, and they exceeded our expectations. These guys in Macedonia, they're crazy. They're in the middle of this incredible trial, and they're just going all after generosity and giving in a way that's like shocking people. And they say it's urgent. It's like they've got an emergency. They're getting in touch with Paul. It's like, Paul, can you call 999 for us? We've got an emergency. It's like, yeah, sure, I'll call 999. Right, what's your emergency? I'm not giving yet. That's my emergency. Call handler's like, sorry, what service do you require? Christian Aid. Have you got Christian Aid? Have you got the bank details of a local church? I'm not giving yet. It's urgent. Help, quickly. Send me the things I need. This is an emergency. And I think that's kind of crazy. That's a surprising outcome for a church in the middle of severe trial and extreme poverty to be so desperate to give that they consider it an emergency. So what's going on there? Because that seems a bit strange. Well, I noticed three things about these churches. Firstly, I noticed that God has done a really powerful work in their hearts to bring about joy. Like the good news of Jesus, the news that Jesus has died in their place. And he's made it possible for them to live a new life that starts now and goes on forever. That news has brought about a joy that's just like bursting out of them. Paul describes it as overflowing joy. And actually, even this morning, as we were praying, people were sharing this sense of joy. As we were singing a bit earlier, I was thinking about this. And I suspect there's some of us here today where it's like the talk ends here. Actually, you just need to know that Jesus died for you. He loves you, he cares about you deeply, and he has the possibility for you to live a new life which starts now and goes on forever. And that can bring about a joy that you've never experienced before. And I suspect there are some of us here who are beginning to experience that in the church, that new joy. And if that's you, the talk has ended. You just stay in that place of just meeting with the Lord and receiving joy from him. But there are some other things I notice as well about this church. The second one is this thing of suffering and poverty. And what happens is, far from like being a reason for them to not give, it gives them an opportunity to exceed people's expectations. It's like, oh, they wouldn't be able to do anything. They're just in such a mess, they're in such a crisis. Surely they couldn't do anything. That's what everyone speaks over them, and that gives them an opportunity to exceed people's expectations. And the third thing I notice is that they're part of a movement, a move of God in their region, in the world around them, that they're excited about. And they want to play their part in something bigger than their own church or their own house or their own community or whatever it is. When we're introduced to them, we're introduced to them as the Macedonian churches. So it's not even one church. This is a community of churches saying, please, can we give together to enable something bigger? Paul, we see what's happening around the region. We see these churches being planted and lives transformed. Can we contribute towards that? We would consider that a privilege to contribute towards this movement. But that's interesting because when I think about those three things, I think, well, that sort of feels like us. If you're talking about joy, and if you're talking about a context of poverty and trial, and if you're talking about being part of a movement and a move of God, well, to me, that feels like us. I think that might be our church that we're talking about. So for starters, let's think about joy for a second. A few months ago, we invited our friend Steve Moss to come and preach. And Steve had this word about joy. He's basically had this sense from the Lord that God wants to bring joy back into the church in a way that the churches haven't experienced for a time. And I thought it was so brilliant when I heard Steve speak on this. I met up with him. I said, Steve, please will you come and speak to our church about this? And he said, Andy, I would love to come. I would love to come. Of course I'll come. But I feel like this is kind of the thing that you already do. I mean, as I look on, I don't feel like you necessarily have a joy problem. When I talk to people about leading services here, I'm like, just whatever you do, don't leave too many pauses because people will clap and cheer and you won't be able to stop them. It's like, that's... I'll give you it, John. I'll give you it. But no, I don't take that lightly, actually. Because I think what's happening is in our community, we've got a relentless decision to celebrate and worship Jesus despite our circumstances. That he's good and he's done good things. And so, yeah, we'll dance about and do the actions and spray each other with imaginary fire extinguishers and all of those things because we have experienced a joy that goes beyond our circumstances. And I hope you've noticed that. Interestingly, what it means when we're talking about giving is that there are certain emotional responses that aren't welcome almost. It's like if you're feeling guilty as we talk about money, well, don't worry. Don't give as a result of guilt. Only give if God's given you a joy to do it. If you feel excited about doing it. No one has to give anything. We all come to church for free. Everybody came to church for free at one point because somebody else paid. Now, if that gives you a joy to pay for other people, fantastic. If you feel guilty, don't worry about it. If we're talking about anxiety as well, if you think, I feel anxious about how it would work with my money or whatever, again, don't give from a place of anxiety. Give if God has shown you that he'll bring about freedom and a lack of anxiety as you give. He'll release you from worrying about your money. We've got a joyful church, I think. And so my encouragement is maybe we're also to let our joy well up into generosity. Secondly, then also, I think we've known our fair share of suffering and challenge and trial. It's not that easy to make ends meet in Blackpool, is it? I don't suspect loads of us are just falling into easy jobs or incredibly lucrative investments. It's not that easy. One of the pretty astonishing statistics from our giving at the moment is that the average gift given to our church at the moment is £138 a month. And I think that's incredible because actually I don't know a load of really, really rich people in our church. I don't think there are many. I mean, if there are some hedge fund managers or something, do talk to me afterwards. But I don't think there are there? Which what it means is it's ordinary people giving extraordinarily generously. We're a community of people coming together with bumps and bruises and sickness and criminal records and addictions and all sorts of different things. And God is raising up generosity in our community. I think of a time a bit earlier this year where we were in the creche. We set it up as an office in the week. And Rach got a message to say that we'd had a one-off large anonymous donation in cash. And that's kind of unusual, and it kind of happened through the bank. And when that happens, you think, oh, well, there's some stuff you probably need to check. You need to make sure that someone hasn't accidentally paid into the wrong account or whatever. You might need to account for it, make sure that there's no allegations of tax fraud or anything like that if it was happening. And so through the bank, we were able to get in touch with the person and just say, thanks, obviously, but also did you mean to do this? And were you wanting to be anonymous or was it just the best way to pay it in? And I asked this guy if I could tell a little bit of his story, and he said I could. And what he said was that a few years ago, he had been baptized in this church, and he'd begun serving on teams and joining Bible studies, and God had begun to do a deep work in his heart. And then really significantly, he'd come away with us to Focus, this festival that we go to over the summer. And at Focus, he had met with Jesus in a profound way. And it's like everything had changed. Everything had started again. And he discovered a peace and a joy that he didn't know previously. And from there, everything seemed to be on the up until he started getting some headaches. And the headaches got worse, they got worse. And then our friend Lee, who many of you will have known, he went to see a doctor. And unfortunately, he was diagnosed with a massive brain tumor surrounding the central core part of his brain. And the option was basically you can go with chemo to try and extend life for a little bit, or you could just say not. And he decided not. But the peace that Jesus had given him at Focus, that remained. The joy that he'd experienced through an encounter with Jesus, that somehow remained. And through all of the excruciating headaches and the no-hope diagnosis, he maintained such a confidence in the promises of God like nobody else I've ever met. And right up until he died earlier this year, he was just so confident in what God was doing. And he had a joy and a peace. And so shortly before he died, on his own, very quietly, he went into a bank and exceeding all expectations, he gave a gift to our church that would completely cover our church's Focus budget for 3 years so that tons of families and individuals could come to Focus and encounter Jesus in the way he did. I think that's remarkable. What it shows me is that suffering doesn't need to limit generosity. Instead, it can enable ways of generosity happening that would far outstrip anyone's expectations. Lastly, what I notice is that our church as well is part of a move of God and a movement. God is doing something, I believe, in our nation and in our church that is like a once-in-a-generation moment. There's an openness to encountering Jesus at this moment like I've never seen before, that people have prayed for decades, that people have sown for decades. And it's looking very much like the people who are going to work to receive that harvest, it's going to be us. To take just an example from our network, the HTB network, just over the last few years, our network has planted or revitalized over 200 churches across the UK. We've trained over 350 leaders. Even just since COVID, our churches, in our little family of churches, have supported over 600,000 people through social transformation projects. But there's something happening bigger than that in the UK as well. In 2018, just 4% of 18 to 24-year-olds said that they attended church at least monthly. That's now 16%, 4 times as many people. For young men, it's 5 times as many. Again, there's been this huge jump in the number of young adults who say they believe in God. It's about a 17% jump. It represents 1.02 million people in the last few years who've decided that maybe God is calling them. This is a once-in-a-generation moment. There's a move of God. God is doing something in our church, in our family of churches, in our nation. And we have the opportunity to be part of that. We've heard stories over the last couple of weeks of how God's doing it right in front of us, doing amazing things that we couldn't possibly control, that we couldn't possibly orchestrate. He's at work. And I believe it's only just the beginning of what he might want to do. So, I guess when I think about that and I think about how this church in Macedonia sets such an example of generosity, starting from a place of joy, standing in defiance to their own circumstances and playing their part in a movement, and I see that opportunity, I think, well, why not us? Why wouldn't we be able to be a radically, shockingly generous church? And so I'm asking whether you'd do that today, whether you would consider being generous to our church and starting to give regularly to support the work that's going on here.